Hello everyone, and welcome to another session of this seed series with No Diabetes. My name's Anne Morris, and it's a real pleasure to actually facilitate these sessions for No Diabetes, and I hope you'll find today's topic very interesting. Our guest today is Liz Obersteller, and she is a diabetes nurse practitioner and credentialed diabetes educator, and it's a real pleasure to welcome her today. Liz graduated as a registered nurse in 1982 from Royal Darwin Hospital, and she commenced working as a diabetes educator in 1987. She completed her training as a diabetes nurse practitioner in 2008, and it's a very hard thing to do because it's a master's degree in nursing. I'm currently working in rural and remote locations, Liz says, and in New South Wales, Murrumbidgee area. In this role, she supports people with diabetes through all stages of their lives, working with and supporting those living with diabetes to achieve their goals. So, welcome to today's session, Liz.
Thanks, Anne. It's great to be here and having a chat with you.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about diabetes and climate change, which people will go, really? Yes, I use a lot of things that might have plastic containers in them, but it's not really that sort of talk we're going to do today, is it?
Absolutely not. It's really expanding on some of the things you might have heard around having a disaster plan if it's for floods or fires, expanding on that a little bit more.
So there's been a lot of attention paid to the combined effect of non-communicable disease, such as diabetes and climate change, and I wonder if that's not a good place to start our chat today.
Yeah, I think one of the really important things is understanding in health terminology, we use this term non-communicable diseases, and this might include diabetes, heart disease, respiratory disease, and there are things that, as it says, it's non-communicable, so don't catch it. And it's has been shown in some of the research that's coming out, and must say there's not a lot. The research is sparse, but it's out there, saying that our changing in our climates, our temperatures, our extremes of temperatures, and the effect that has on our environment does impact on how an individual with diabetes actually lives and manages their disease. For example, when there is some evidence that those with diabetes and cardiovascular disease, when it's the extremes of temperature, they're more likely to end up having a cardiovascular event and end up in hospital with increased mortality. And there's also small amounts saying that women are more prone to develop gestational diabetes if they have their pregnancy early on in the hot weather. There's no real it's a bit of controversial because there's no real evidence of why, but on the studies that have been done coming out of Australia, when they looked at it, it's what's actually been shown.
So there's been some research that has suggested the incidence of these things, such as diabetes, can be exacerbated by climate change drivers. And with increasing temperature and the decrease in rainfall and extreme weather events like you've talked about already, climate sensitive or climate induced sort of issues. I was wondering if you'd like to talk more about that.
So when we talk about climate induced things, so these are the extremes of the temperatures that happen. So for example, when you're living in, say, the North Queensland or the Northern Territory or the top of Western Australia, what's been happening is that the temperatures have been increasing in the dry seasons. So in those period of time between April and September, so temperatures up to 30 or 40 degrees or 40 plus is quite common now at this period of time. And at the other extreme of it, during the wet season, the humidity and as we're seeing it this year, the extremes with the rainfalls and the floods that go along to that. So that impacts the food viability, our food sustainability, because of a lot of our food comes from those areas, and we know therefore that we hear on the news that your cost of your fruit and vegetables is going up. So how does and then the impact that happens down the tract on those lower socioeconomical, how can they actually afford to buy that fresh fruit and vegetables, which we know is really important for maintaining their health? Therefore, we go around to those quick fast food things again that they feel they can do, then the obesity level goes up again, and we're in this vicious cycle of the impact on, the risk of developing diabetes, and those with diabetes actually increasing the complications that go along with it at that point of time. So,
go on, sorry.
No, that's all.
Oh, well, I was just thinking, when we was thinking about what we were going to talk about, I'm sure you've experienced, just like I have over the years we've both been working, which is several, that, that you had seen an increase in particularly type 1 diabetes when there are discrete seasonal changes. And, where there are distinct seasonal identifiers, you often have an increase in the prevalence than what you see in particularly type 1. I certainly know that. And I just wondered if you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, I think that we've always had this, as educators, we've always seen this trend. There is a particular time of the year, so around Easter time, when we're getting that changes through to it at this period of time. Also coming into, or for us, it's always around the conference as well at that period of time. Quite a number of diagnosed children at this point of time, and also around around Christmas period. So again, we can speculate, but I don't think the research that has ever been out there has actually said that would be an impact onto it. And, I'm not going to go any further than that, because, when we're looking at genetics things, but the question does to it, if we get these changes and extremes and we do get the exposure to the viruses that period of time, is it one of the things that actually tips people across at that point of time?
Yeah, and we've certainly seen COVID-19, haven't we?
Exactly right. And the same with, I think we're looking at too, at the other point of time, those people with type 2 diabetes, and when they get sick with our viruses, particularly coming into that winter period of time, and they get really sick and they stop looking after themselves, and they end up in hospital with HHS, with the hyperosmolar states at that point of time, because they're too sick to look after each other as well too. That changing environment, and they may not have enough money to cover their heating to do it, and they're not eating properly. So I think in the past we've just thought about that, but do we need to think that what's happening around us is also impacting onto it? And I think that's where I wanted to come from today, to actually get people to start thinking that yes, we hear a lot in the mainstream about climate change and the need to look at our fossil fuels and to be aware, our little things we do at home, like recycling and the move away from plastic bags. But is there more that we need to be thinking about as well too, and putting it out there further than that type of thing? How do we get that out get people to think about it? Yes.
And because people will not necessarily connect the dots that way that we're talking today, but it is going to be very important, because the impact is likely to become much greater, and it won't be seen until it's already there, sort of thing, will it?
Yeah, that's right. So, for example, there needs to be a whole system approach to it. Yes, as individual we can do with it, and the government might have a role, but there is we need to have a whole system approach to it. So, for example, the Western Sydney Diabetes Collaborative with Glenn Mabley, the way they've tackled the rising rates of type 2 diabetes in their community, and it's large. So they've done all the measurements and geospatially mapped out where the high HbA1cs, the high rates of type 2 diabetes are, and the increasing rates of obesity. And they've linked it then to the fact that public transport is very poor, so there's a lot of use of the cars, the green spaces are down, and the strips of takeaway food. So you've got a low socioeconomic things, and you've got all these factors into it. So the program that they have has actually taken, factors from all parts of our community that we live in, not just health. So it is diabetes driving it, but they've brought in the council, they've got the government, they've got the private enterprises, they've brought in the community groups into it to try and create an environment that is actually going to reduce the rates of diabetes. One of the things that came out of the WHO statement released on the 21st of April was that we need to reverse diabetes. We need to be able to reverse diabetes, and a lot of way we can, and this is type 2 diabetes, a lot of that is around how we live in an environment and how our environment is actually impacts and how we work, how we work with it.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things I was reading through some of the things we were going to talk about today, and a heart attack or an myocardial infarction, but a heart attack is one of the leading causes, is the leading cause of death among people with diabetes, and was found to occur more frequently during times of extreme temperature. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so the paper that I found talked about that. It found the hospitalisation rates and the deaths, mortality, so the deaths and the disabilities associated with that was significantly up in the study areas, the two areas that studied. So that was in the West Indies and another one in America recently as well too. So it definitely showed that the stress of those higher temperatures. So if people aren't able to have temperature control or keep cool or keep their fluids up at this point of time, the stresses that go along with that actually create those other stresses, which was going to put the heart more at risk at this point of time. A lot of that, as we know, the diabetes as well, so they're going to get dehydrated, so another factor that goes on to it. And in Australia here, we actually have, in many of our areas, your diabetes educator may contact you, or your community nurse may contact you if you've got a history of being an older person with cardiovascular disease and diabetes, and do you have a plan for heat stress days? The governments these days put out warning that it's going to be heat stress days. So it is actually important that you do think about those things. It's not just another word or it's another warning that's coming out from the government, but how does it actually impact and infect me, and what do I need to do about it at that point of time? I think, again, we have a lot of that coming from the top down, but as health professionals and people that might live with diabetes, do you talk to anyone else about it, and do you talk to your neighbours about what that might mean and how I'm going to manage and the problems I might have, or if I can't stay at home, where can I go at that point of time? And it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, yes, it is. I mean, I think we've had such extremes of drought and rain and fires and everything. They all contribute in their own way, because they are so unpredictable, and people have got to just try and survive it, don't they?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so it is some of the places we know that advise people to go to the public libraries or to go to the malls where the air conditioning is at that point of time, to keep cool at that. If they can't afford to run with their electricity, can't run to it, what are your other plans onto it? So it is part of your sick day management plan. And, sick day management can cover so much at this point of time. A lot of it is focusing on if you get diarrhea or if you're having an operation. But what happens if it's really sick, it's really hot? How do you manage that? And what's your plan for that at that point of time? So I think that needs to be taken into consideration and talked about, the same as our winter strategies. In our cooler areas, our winter strategies. So how are you going to, if you do get unwell, or if you get, who are you going to contact? Who's going to let you know at that point of time? So our sick day plans and our disaster plans, they don't actually come together as a document. They're two separate things. But should they? Should we as health professionals be trying to manage and meld them a little bit more, in light of the fact that our environment does impact on living with diabetes?
I just wonder whether it's a good opportunity to just bring into a conversation about this, because it leads into some of the things we're also going to talk about. It sort of flows on about how people can actually create a plan to be prepared for things like the unexpected, because I think particularly with the summer 2019-2020 summer, where those fires were, it was just horrendous and really unsurvivable because they were so extreme. People, unfortunately, we've learnt that we leave early or we don't stay and try and defend, because that can be very fraught. But, let's talk about how people can actually develop a preparedness plan so that they have some element of thinking around what they do in various circumstances, depending on where they live, because there are so many differences in varied environments and communities around this country, which are so diverse from one extreme to the other. So it's not one size fits all, that's for sure.
Exactly right, and you would know, and I know from the areas around to it, when people left their houses. So in our area, it was the Tumut, Tumbarumba, Batlow area. When they left, they didn't take any of their diabetes supplies with them whatsoever, and we did have admissions to hospital with people with DKA and those with HHS as well, because they did not take those with it. It's like, we've got to go. So what do we take? We take things that are important to us. We take our family, we take our pets and our animals and maybe our heirlooms. But a part of that box that we have to have is, if we need medications, or where do we go to that point of time, and also understanding it's a huge stress, and that's going to put have a significant impact on your diabetes as well at this point of time. And I think the psychological impact of all of these disasters on people living with diabetes comes back down the track onto it and does impact them as well. So we've got to also think that these things that are happening around to it, and their food safety and keeping warm, has that effect on their mental health as well too. Do we ask that question? How are they managing coping as well?
I always remember that because most people may or may not know, but I'll disclose it, my husband had type 1 for 65 years. And I remember when we would fly overseas and they say, you don't take anything with you, you leave everything behind. I used to say to the cabin crew, this comes with us, because without this, he's going to be in real trouble in a raft in the middle of the Pacific somewhere.
Yeah.
I always thought, how do you negotiate things like that? It's really not easy. And they went, oh, no, it can't come. I went, oh, yes, it does come. It's quite interesting when you're confronted by it,
Yeah, so you see the people picked up, the floods that have come through, and they come so quickly, and they're just picked up with the clothes on their back. But we know that these people are going to have been, a lot of these people would have been living with a chronic disease. So what happens after that point of time? Is it we donate our medication, we donate our food and our clothing? Do we look after their chronic diseases as well at that point of time? So it's I think I hope that people are going to start to see that it's not just what the government is talking about, climate change, but how does it actually work for you, and not necessarily I'm going to be more sustainable, but I do need to think about that when I'm living with a chronic disease. And another factor to think about it when we're talking about that is our food supplies. As we know, with our droughts and with the floods, and we haven't really got the full extent of what's going to the floods. How are people going to manage if they are paying $30, $40 for your beef, or your simple things like a tomato or an apple are up $9 or $10 a kilo? How do people decide, if they are on a budget with everything else, what is important?
Yes, because usually it's going to be the cheapest, most convenient, most easiest thing to do, and of course that's got its own set of consequences, hasn't it? With cardiovascular disease, an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, impaired glucose tolerance, an increased risk of those that becoming more chronic, and the issues and the health impact that has on not only the person but across the whole country.
Yeah, I think so. And you know, when we hear from our government and when we hear the policies that do with it, it's all piecemeal around to it. It covers you at that top bit, but it actually, what does it mean to us as a community that might be living with diabetes, or an individual that's living with diabetes, and diabetes, including, you know, might have heart disease or might have kidney disease or eye disease if you had it for long enough at the point of time. But I need to be able to keep my health up, keep my physical, mental health up. I need to be able to contribute to society to do it as well too. But I need to be able to live, and can be quite a juggling thing, and sometimes it's not necessarily acknowledged, I don't think.
No, that's right. Well, just along from this then, let's talk about the impact of physical activity, unhealthy food, increased greenhouse emissions, and all of these characteristics impacting on the increased risk of type 2 diabetes. Let's just extend into that.
Yeah, so that's quite easy to actually think. I think people can actually visualize it around to it. So if people are, there's a lot more with the urbanization that's happening onto it, and the time that people have to actually sit in a car to get from point A to point B. For example, I know after 2.5 hours in a car to get from point A to point B, for my traveling, I'm feeling quite stiff and sore. And the last thing I actually want to do is get up and go for a walk at that point of time. We've lost, when we're talking about our transport as well too, we go back to the fact that a lot of the time these days when parents take children to school, we don't walk anymore, mainly because schools are further away, or it's on the way to work, so we've got to drop them off at that point of time, or even from the point of time of being safe. So we've lost that capacity where you've got that local environment where the children are safe to walk to school when they're getting their exercise, as well as the parents onto it. And then when you look at our infill in our big cities, even in our little cities, it means we've now got the housing situations where you've got these tall blocks of flats and units, and the amount of green space around is even less. So you're not wanting to go very far or go out for a walk, or I don't have the capacity or the money to actually go to a gym, and that's not what I want to do at that point of time. So when we've been building these infills and we've got to put more people in more spots, we've actually forgotten about those other things. So supposedly in the design, when they're designing things, they're supposed to take them into consideration, but it's not happening. It's not improving the health, mental health and physical health and well-being of our community the way we've actually done it as well. And, the spread. So, even, Melbourne, how far it's spread and how far people have to travel in Sydney and Brisbane to get to their workplaces as well. So the design hasn't necessarily kept up with how things go to it. Do we have to go back? We've had COVID, and in Sydney at the moment, and probably in Melbourne, they're saying, come back to the city, where people have stayed closer to home. And they want people to go back in and spend their money, but it's that travel and getting there at that point of time into it. That balance is not there, I don't think. But I don't have an answer.
No, it is quite complex. The circumstances have just meant that people are no longer prepared to actually do that. And I feel very fortunate that I live in a regional city in Victoria. But yes, I can understand why, and a lot of people have left the city too, haven't they, for lifestyle reasons?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. They've left the city to go onto it for that lifestyle reason, so that they're able to take and play with the children in their park areas and around to it. And this comes back to that when we are designing and not as not tokenism, that we really are thinking about what is around and who's that building for and what's going to be around to it, and is there that capacity to have the gardens onto it, or have that area where that the community gets together and talks about things. So that sense of community is still really important for actually reducing non-communicable diseases. When people have that sense of community around them, they feel better.
Yeah.
They feel better about it all, and they're involved in things.
Oh, and my word. And again, coming from that place where I'm fortunate to live in a small regional community, the commitment that the whole community makes to making sure that everybody stays safe means that if there is a problem, and we all know about what happened last year, but when there is a problem, if there's something in the community, everybody just knuckles straight down. Everybody just pulls their head back and they go, right, we've got to just do this for the community. And you have a different overall commitment to your fellow citizens because you're more accountable directly to them.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing too. In a lot of the communities, the smaller communities, they are concentrating on how can we bring it back to the roots? How can we get more involvement in physical activity at all levels? What can we bring in to make it usable, friendly, cost effective, so that we are maintaining that health and well-being of our community that we've got, because that's our lifeblood. It's understanding if we look after them, they're going to stay, they're going to keep our community going onto that point of view. And that's coming back to that designing, that when we are looking after health, it's not just health that has to be involved in looking after health. It is this planning, the government side of thing. It is the environmentalist. It is our food producers, and all of those sorts of things around to it. And we need to really be concentrating on keeping it local. Let's keep it local, and it benefits everyone.
Yeah, exactly. So I get, well, we've covered a lot of territory and it's been really interesting. I just wonder, as we head towards the sort of the last bit of our chat today, there are some things we've started to talk about, the planning and preparedness for basically what you're going to do, but not only what you're going to do, but including in that what you want to take, and having all those things are so critical to your well-being, to help to make sure that you cope with what's going on around you better. Because if your glucose levels are elevated, even though you might feel okay, you still won't be thinking sharply, despite the stress. So many elements are important here. So let's look at things that we've already mentioned today and we've covered in a broad sense, and sort of dot point them off. So looking at gap analysis and planning, we've already talked about things like that this afternoon. Is there anything else you want to add into that, thinking about the importance of planning spaces and areas for people to actually live in, and how important that is to being able to prepare populations for what lies ahead?
I would say there's a lot. There's a lot more that we could do, but unfortunately, when I'm saying this is I actually don't have the experience or the expertise to know to that. So what I would really like to do, if we're looking at supporting you living with diabetes, is actually us as health professionals to actually reach out to get these other people involved in it, to get them to come and have a chat in here, to have your have an urban planner come and have a chat. What do you have to, an urban planner, what do you have to think about at that turn of time? Maybe even some examples of communities that have worked together, to how the individuals themselves living with it, how they've brought things around to it. So it's a really hard question to go to where from here. I think I've only just talked a little bit onto it. But I want to put those seeds out there, and I think we need to explore it in more options. Have people talking about it, not just at that higher level about I'm going to do it, but how can I do it with my community, and how can I, if I'm a parent, what am I going to need to do also around the sustainability of this environment for my children to come, and preventing them to getting onto it. So particularly, I think a good area might be is our women with post-gestational, and working with them to include the child and families, the preschools at that point of time into it, is maintaining that health and well-being at that, around to it, is that the lessons that children learn when they go to early childhood or childcare centres, where they are exposed to all types of food at that point of time, need to continue the whole way through. We need to raise our children, as I said, as a family, and the communities their family around to it. I think that's pretty important around to it as well too. So I haven't really answered your question because I don't know where to go to next.
Very difficult. No, but it is very difficult, and I wasn't really expecting you to come up with a brilliant solution, but I do think you're right. We've got to start to use our resources as the professionals who are heavily involved here to start to trigger those questions and make people think about it from a different point of view. And not many people think about climate change with a health impact, apart from the obvious.
No,
yes,
that's right. Apart from the
if it's freezing cold, yes, people get exposure, but they don't think about the broader consequence of it happening and what the implications are, because they don't just tie together. But I think you're right. We do have to do something, and try and use our collective voice.
Yeah, try and use our collective around to it, is to have that say of what's going on to it, and in it may be the media highlights those current affair, even that they're sensationalist, but it may get across is that the challenge is that as you age in this environment and in the extremes, how difficult it is to actually live a healthy life.
Yes. Are there any final tips you have for people around how to develop a preparedness plan around medications, around things? I mean, the trouble is, if you put stashes of medications in a place that you mightn't use for 12 months, then it's out of date. So that's not going to work either. But just maybe having a list that you can check off if you've got to leave and you've given yourself enough time, that you can go, right, my medications is on my list, whatever that is. You don't have to list them all, just put them all together and they come with you. I don't know whether you've got any brilliant pieces of advice there.
I think the disaster plans, particularly even the councils put out around, say, in those areas that are prone to cyclones, they say at the beginning of cyclone season, have you got your cyclone kit ready for leaving, so that, you've got a box with your water and at that point of time. And if you know the cyclone's coming at that point of time, okay, well, I'm going to put my pump equipment, my extra lines, my needles, those sorts of things in that box ready to go. Floods are a bit different. Fires, again, we're giving these days, and that's I think that's think about it. We've learned our lesson. The geospatial mapping of how things going gives people time. And, we're encouraged, as you said earlier on, to go, because we've lost so many lives and things onto it. It's you go, unfortunately, and being able to have that plan. And I think if there would be one thing that I might say is our disaster plan that we have as developed from ADA and our sick day management plan, how do they go together? And I don't think they do.
Yes. Yep. No, I'm not quite sure they do either. In fact, I know they don't.
Yeah, and that's right. Our sick day management talks when you're sick, but not about it.
Yes, we do. We need to refine that so that there's consistent information across all of the position statements that ADA has. That's where people are more likely to go for their resources in these circumstances.
Yeah, so as health professionals, they go to it. And even for Diabetes Australia, the disaster management plans and the sick day management plans, there's no tying between the two of them.
No.
And Diabetes Australia has mentioned in some of the documents I've had a look at about climate change, but again, it's not in the front there around to it as well, because they are concentrating onto it. So we need to have a bit more forefront into everyone coming together, the alliances, I think. And I think as consumers, people living with it, we actually have that capacity to put that voice out there, that we need that. We want to get together, we want to look after our health and well-being, but we need more than just Diabetes Australia.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Another thing that's listed on our things we were going to talk about in our possible solutions and discussion is identifying people at high risk. And that's really for us to do, isn't it? We need to do that in our practice as diabetes educators, and the team basically need to identify people who they'd be concerned about and who are high risk, and who may, for a variety of reasons, be at high risk, and it may not be obvious.
Yeah, that's exactly right onto it. So our mental health care clients, when we have these disasters at this period of time, it often triggers their mental health and well-being, and then they don't look after any other point of time. So definitely those sorts of things. And a lot of organisations in community health and other health organisations now have run programs, and they've identified things that actually, if people had numerous admissions to hospital, they had more than one chronic disease that's listed because of that, they are flagged as high risk, and then they are linked in with the care coordinators, or the in Queensland, the care navigators, that part of it as well too, to make sure they've got their plan and they're ready to go to it. So but if you're working in private practice, or you're just working your GP, again, I think that's important to identify at GPs, that meetings that they have, and to identifying that such and such is old, they live by themselves, why haven't we seen them, those sorts of things. That community, that sense of community around knocking on people's doors as well too. It is pretty important, bringing it back then to the community and how that supports each other.
It's a really important topic, and people won't have thought through a lot of the things we've talked about today. So thanks again for your time, and I'll now open the session for questions.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Liz. So we have some questions, Liz, and the first one is, I have type 2 diabetes and live in Western Sydney. I see lots of McDonald's and KFC, which is not helping the younger generation. What can be done about it?
So I think there's a multi-pronged approach that has to take on to this. So McDonald's is a big corporation, Hungry Jack's, all of those are huge corporations, and they bring in money, they provide employment, and they sustain that community in a lot of ways. However, the types of foods that they actually provide might not be the best. So there's a couple of ways that people can do with it. So definitely approaching, if it's in the strip and there's 2 or 3 within 4 or 5 kilometres, there should be some planning around that we can't bring any more into that point of time. So that point of time is at that council level, and at the state level about the planning onto it. It's the choice at this point of time why do you need to go into that McDonald's for a point of view? Is it one because it's convenient? And when you're talking about being convenient, is because you're too tired to prepare a meal, or is it because it's cheaper to buy at that point of time? And it's in asking yourself those questions at that point of time. So it's actually reflecting back into me. Yes, they're there. Do I have to use it? And if I have to use it, why? And then at that point of time, it's sort of understanding what's on that menu at McDonald's. We've got some better options that you can actually choose at that point of time. And particularly with McDonald's, where you can actually choose to prepare your own things. So you can actually say, I want a burger, which is protein, it's got your fat, and I just want it lettuce and tomato rather than having the bun on top of that. And I would have water as opposed to having a soft drink at this point of time. So it's being able to take the time and ask and prepare those meals at that point of time, if that's the reason why you've got to be there. I must admit, sometimes when I'm driving, that's where I'll go to and get a drink and get a toasted sandwich. It's not the best, but it means that I'm out and about and around to it. So that's the two questions onto it. From that society point of view, what you can do, but from an individual point of view, what you can do as well. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, it does, thanks. I think it does anyway. I hope it does for this person. Is extreme weather a threat to diabetes and complications?
Yes, definitely extreme weather's extreme weather's at this point of time. So if we're experiencing a heat and it's 40 to 45 degrees at this point of time. So again, there's numerous points to it. These days where we know our power grids are susceptible for going down. So if you've got in those hot weather at this point of time and your power goes off, how do you maintain your fridge and your food? How do you maintain the temperature of your insulin? If you happen to be, you have problems with your sleep apnea, how do you use the machine and get adequate sleep? If you don't get adequate sleep, increase your stress levels, makes you more risk for having a cardiovascular event. So that's the extremes of hot weather, and the same things at the other end at the point of time. If it gets really cold and you can't maintain your temperature, again, you are more likely then to use things like a fire or the bars at this point of time. If you have peripheral neuropathy, put your feet up to it. You can't feel it. You're more likely to get your ulcers. Or if you have some of those other conditions where you get chilblains at this point of time too, more likely to get your ulcers and then progress at that point of time. So yes, so from it, that's definitely an risk for if you're living with type 2 diabetes, type 1 with those other things.
Have you got any resources that you can be succinct about, or that we might be able to include as a resource when it gets reposted, when this session gets reposted, that can give people a sense of how to prepare coping strategies to manage the risk from high or very low temperatures? Are there any resources that come to mind, or would their podiatrist be able to help them, other people as they see people get those individual resources?
Definitely the podiatrist will have something on managing those chilblains and if you've got peripheral neuropathy for your feet, definitely around to do that. But there isn't anything specific here except for foot, generalized things. There's nothing, if you were looking around to that I would be able to pull out of my off the computer or search that I could actually give you. I haven't got anything around at all. So I think
no, very difficult.
One thing I would say to there is, as if you're a consumer living with it, going back to Diabetes Australia, to NDSS, saying we need this.
Yes, it would be a great resource on NDSS for people to be able to use.
Yeah.
That's great. They're great, 3 great questions. Thank you to those who've asked them, and great answers. Thanks, Liz. So just rounding off again today, thank you so much, Liz. And I think to people who are watching today who've got diabetes, whatever sort of diabetes you have, think about some of the things that we've talked about today, because they will have implication, and you may have already realised that some of the things that Liz has mentioned today has actually made a difference to you. If you don't have a team of professionals to support you, go and find a diabetes educator. Go and find a person like us who can actually be part of your everyday care and support you, or not everyday care, but support you in the delivery of your everyday care. We can be an enormous resource to you, and so do find a diabetes educator that can provide the ongoing support you need to help make your diabetes successful. And the things that we've talked about today really will have impact, and once you reflect on some of the information that you've heard today, you'll think that it is quite cross-sectional and very much within our communities that we have to think about all these things.
Yep.
So thanks again, Liz, for your time. It's good.
Totally agree with you. Challenge yourself, challenge where you're up to, and challenge your health professionals to support you.
Yes, my word, absolutely, 100%. Thanks again, everyone, for watching. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon, Liz. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. See you.